the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz, a conversationalist. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company creates a way to capture smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Karl LaPan, who is the president and CEO of the Northeast Indiana Innovation Center, known as the NIC. Welcome.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
So I want to jump right in and talk a little bit about your background. So you actually have been, you were the only an original president and CEO of the NIC.
Correct.
Which just celebrated its 20th anniversary.
We did.
And the WEOC, which is the Women's Entrepreneurial Opportunity Center, is celebrating its 5th anniversary.
That's true.
But you refer to yourself as a certified dream manager. And I want to know what a certified dream manager is.
Right. I do not interpret dreams.
Oh, darn.
But Matthew Kelly, who wrote the book, The Dream Manager, and he's written a number of books on culture and employee engagement. He has a program called The Dream Manager, and you go through a certification process in order to coach to the methods that he has in his book. So everybody's disappointed when I tell them I can't interpret their dreams, but I help you fulfill and maybe actualize your dreams instead.
Right. And a lot of what the programs at the NIC are designed to do is really to help coach and mentor business owners and entrepreneurs in different stages of the business life cycle, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the majority of people, may understand their idea well, but they often lack some of the business advisory services and skills and competencies that they need to kind of take that idea and run with it.
So over the 20 years now, and you've seen lots of people with lots of businesses, what have you learned, and what's changed about what you see people doing or interest in starting or owning businesses?
Yeah, I think to the first half of the question, what have I learned? I think number one is suspend judgment, right? Don't, too often people along the way of having their idea and working with it, share it with other people, and they often get feedback that maybe isn't as reflective of the thought process that the person put into their idea. Right. So the first thing is suspend judgment. As long as it's not illegal or immoral, right, then I think it's about helping the entrepreneur or the business builder take that next step. And so I have really tried to always be a sounding board for helping people take that next step and to help them identify the next 2 or 3 things they need to do in order to be successful. And
you're also very big through the work at the NIC to sort of standardizing and best practices and also measuring metrics. And so what are some of the core values that you see necessary to wanting to start a company?
Yeah, there are a number of research studies that kind of point out those important talents and characteristics. First is really self-awareness. Entrepreneurs that have higher self-awareness have higher coachability, and therefore they're more likely to listen to other people, whether that be subject matter experts or mentors, to help them take their idea to the next level. Second, you hear a lot about grit, and Angela Duckworth's, right. Grit equals passion plus perseverance. I think that powering through adversity, having false starts, all of those things are part of that learning journey for the entrepreneur. Resilience, I think, is a big one. Intellectual curiosity, right? Mm-hmm. Pattern recognition, those kinds of things, of those soft skills that entrepreneurs need in order to be successful. Those are the types of things that we see, and we also use some instruments to help us try to measure that. Not to say whether somebody can't develop those skills and talents, but we also want to kind of see where they are in order
right.
to figure out how best to help them.
I mean, I think one of the key things for an entrepreneur is risk. You have to be able to be comfortable with risk. So, but do you think that you can teach someone to be an entrepreneur or to get that entrepreneurial spirit?
Well, it depends on who you listen to. If you look at the experts, somewhere between 37 and 44% of entrepreneurship is genetic, and the rest is learned. So, if you look at some of the research that's been done about this, the vast majority of people can gain skills that help them to become, good business builders. But we also know from the research that oftentimes a very small percentage, in fact, somewhere around 2.5% of the population, has the rare and special gifts, the 10 talents you need to successfully build a company. The rest of us have to surround ourselves with people with those skills.
Right.
And so what we can do through the assessment process is help you identify how best to surround yourself with the skills. So much of the folklore and mythology of entrepreneurship has been about, it's a one-person idea. This person woke up in the middle of the night, started in a garage.
Right.
The reality is the vast majority of successful, sustainable, and durable companies comes from teams of people that are working on these problems and opportunities.
And also, I think this idea about glorifying being an entrepreneur, like with the Shark Tank, or you hear about all these young startups, out in Silicon Valley who are selling companies for billions, and I think that's glorified and made people think that it's easier. But the reality of it is that, more entrepreneurs, they get divorced, they face depression, very few businesses survive to the 2-year mark. Being able to know sort of how to sit with risk and, being uncomfortable, I think we do glorify it.
Yeah, and when you say those things, it certainly might turn off a lot of people to wanting to start a business, because there is the reality. You have Shark Tank, which is really about promotion. And then you have the reality that entrepreneurs, suffer from major, mental illness at twice the rate of non-entrepreneurs. So there's a lot of self-care related things that we need to do to support entrepreneurs. And there's also this survivability cliff, right? That no matter how good your idea is, at the end of 10 years, somewhere around 26% of the people who started 10 years earlier are still going to be here. So you do have to make sure you do everything to stack the odds in your favor. And so working with support organizations like ours increases that likelihood, that you'll be in that 26% category, not guarantees it.
There was, when I interviewed you before, you made this point, and I know I even had to double check it with you, that the majority of people who are entrepreneurs, they actually don't start, most businesses are not started until they're in their 40s. So it's actually like that they've gone out and worked and then sort of either realized a way they could do it better or differently. So, it is sort of building your own toolbox, in a sense, to be an entrepreneur. I was really surprised about that, because all we hear about are the young 20-somethings who drop out of college. And why is that, do you think, that people don't start businesses until later on?
Yeah, there are really a couple of good, legitimate reasons why that happens. The first is, one of the patterns of success for entrepreneurs is that they have domain expertise. Typically, successful founders of companies have 5 to 7 or greater years of domain expertise in an area that they later take and start their company around. So number one is you have to have that experience, that life learning to help you get there.
Also the contacts, relationships.
The relationships, the connections, the network.
Okay.
Number two, our younger generation has significant college debt that impacts their willingness to take risks, to start something versus going to work for someone else. We have the most entrepreneurial educated generation in our millennials, but they are the least entrepreneurial generation in the workplace today. And so a lot of that comes from messaging that they've received around failure, because this is kind of the ribbon generation.
Everybody gets the trophy.
Right, everybody gets the trophy. There's less likelihood that they're willing to risk it. And there are also parental attitudes telling these younger people, go work for somebody. It'll be safer. It'll be more secure to do so.
Well, I say that's low risk, low reward versus
Yes.
high risk, high reward. But the actual number of people actually starting new endeavors has been on the decline for the last 2 decades, actually. We're seeing that. And, what do you think some of the reasons for that are?
Well, clearly in the most recent economic times, pre-pandemic, the number one reason was for the first time in a long time, wages were growing. For so long, wages have been stagnated. So when wages are growing, it makes going to work for somebody else more attractive than starting your own company. So that's number one.
And also the idea that they actually have found that the more educated you are, the more likely you are to create a successful entrepreneurial business. However, you're more likely in demand by the big corporations, so they actually are paying you in a way to stay there. So there's not that incentive, right?
Absolutely. And then also, if you look at another reason for those lower levels, we have very low unemployment. When unemployment is low, the level of entrepreneurial activity is lower as well. So then you take some of these demographic shifts that have happened, on top of that, and you'll see that, the startup activity over the last couple of decades has gone down, in large measure because the attitudes in the United States towards entrepreneurship, right? There are two motivations for why you start a business: opportunity or necessity. Those that start because of opportunity, you see something that makes the world better, the iPhone, right? Or some new technology, and you start the company. When businesses get started out of necessity, I need a job because I need to feed my family, those jobs tend to be less durable. I think the other big thing that's changing is the fact that side gigs, side hustles, sidepreneurs don't actually are one, not motivated to start companies out of opportunity, but often start them out of necessity. And second, the vast majority of the 50 million side gigs and hustles that are going on in the United States today, the vast majority of those only achieve about $500 a month in income. So it is not a replacement for the income that you're generating.
However, the fastest growing group of doing sidepreneurs are actually minorities and African Americans. So, and I mean, I think that also, one of the things that I wanted to take a step back at, and I sort of have these theories about the idea of the difference between an entrepreneur and a business owner. Because you could be a business owner. You could own a franchise, or you could do, or buy an existing business. And I think that the skills that you need to be a business owner are, like you're talking about, being able to recognize who you need, what are the tools, having, is different than being an entrepreneur when you're either going to disrupt or start something from nothing. And I think that people don't realize, because some people, they want to own a business, but they don't have the talents and skills to be an entrepreneur. And I don't think that people really understand that you can be a business owner, and most people want to have that because they want the flexibility. They don't want their income capped. They want the opportunity, but they're really not entrepreneurs. And I don't know if we do a good enough job of differentiating those for people and letting people know that, no, you don't have to have the idea. You could buy a business, you could buy an existing business, you could start a franchise. I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I get into a lot of trouble in this area because I do believe there are some big distinctive differences, but the world wants to call as many people an entrepreneur as we possibly can. But what I've come to realize over the last 20 years of doing this is that there are three fundamental things that distinguish the entrepreneur from anyone else. The first is that they see an opportunity that's a benefit to somebody beyond themselves or their family, right? So there's a market segment, there's an opportunity, it's a recognition that there's something that they can do that will serve people in a way that somebody will buy something, right? Which gets to the second component. They see an opportunity to create and capture value. And value is both consideration,
Right.
money paid for
Right.
it, and value that what that solution has to offer is something better than or different than what is currently being offered.
Right.
And then the third piece is that the entrepreneur manages uncertainty,
Risk.
right? And that's very different than a multi-level marketing business. Not to say that's not a good business,
Yeah.
but they're not managing uncertainty.
Right.
They're not managing risks and uncertainties
Right.
in ways that put their resources at risk in moving this venture forward. But our society wants to group as many people as entrepreneurs as possible.
See, and I think that's the mistake, because that's why there are so many books written about being an entrepreneur. There are so many programs, seminars, newsletters, because I don't think that you really should put them together, because and I think for women in particular, they actually, for a lot of women, would do better if they bought a franchise or an existing business or something that they want to be a business owner, but not necessarily an entrepreneur, which is really, if you think about it, why a lot of women become realtors. Because in some ways, you are running your own business, but it's within a bigger entity and you have that support. So I think it's really a disservice, because a lot of people, because with an entrepreneur, you also have to have an idea. And, as you know, you've seen more, there are a lot of people who have ideas, they don't have a business out of it.
Right.
And then a lot of people also aren't willing to do what they have to do to take that idea and figure out how to get it to market. And I think that we really should separate them out, and really, I think, recognizing it and having people to do an assessment to say, am I an entrepreneur or am I a business owner? And I think that having a business owner, you can have a very good business. You could, look at some of the franchisees. They, are millionaires times 10. So I think that we should do more of separating those out. And I think especially for women, which I think brings up, the WEOC. Okay. So my first question is, why do we have to have separate programs for women? I'm a believer of, I'm in business, I don't need Forbes for women, I read Forbes. I don't need, programs only for women. I want to go to entrepreneur programs or business programs that are for anybody. Why do we need to have a program and things that are specifically targeted to women?
Yeah, it's a great question. For the first 15 years that we existed, I had that exact mindset and worldview. And what we've realized over the last 5 years that we've been running a women's program is there are some unique and special differences that have to be acknowledged, not to separate and isolate, but to better understand and figure out how we coach and operate differently with women-owned businesses than we do with their male counterparts. And there are a couple of things that both the research informs us and our personal experience has kind of reinforced. The first is that women face very special and unique barriers that their male counterparts do not.
Right. So for instance,
and especially in access to capital,
right,
where there are implicit biases in the capital formation process for women. That is a special barrier that is different than a male counterpart and requires different coaching and skill set.
Right, because there is, first of all, the issue of women's misperception of competency and market knowledge. And then there is the idea that most VCs and money people are men, and a lot of women are going to create pink businesses or service-oriented because they're solving a problem. So the men don't get it, if you look at Spanx, or, they'll be like, what is that? So I think that is an issue. But I also think that women, they don't understand how to value themselves and be able to ask for money. Most people don't like to talk about money, but I also think that you've got to take out, like what I have issues with a lot of the women programs, is they do a lot of the soft selling skills about feeling confident and finding your voice, and I think that's therapy. That's the personal work, and that's why I think for some people who haven't done that work, they're never going to be able to be an entrepreneur, because if they say, I hate selling, well, you sell every day. So they could maybe be a business owner. But I think that we have to separate out that personal coaching, which is therapy, and the professional coaching, which is giving you tools. Because I also think if you get the right tools, if like someone says they don't like numbers, right?
Yeah.
But if you teach them how to read a P&L statement, then they're going to become more confident because they have the tools, not just this rah-rah cheerleading. So what side are you on
Yeah,
this
well,
one?
there's a competency-based component to this, right? But there's also, I think back to one of my graduate professors and my graduate educations in human resources and human behavior, and she said process issues block work on tasks. So if we can't get over the process issues, which confidence is a process issue, if we can't get over that, we can't work on the task of starting our company. So one of the important things in the confidence boosting process is to tool and upskill women business owners to be able to navigate the entrepreneurial journey in a way that's both congruent with who they are as an individual. We're not trying to change anyone.
Right.
And allows them to get good results. And so it really is a combination of doing some of both.
I just find that a lot of the programs are just so much more on the, and I'm not saying the EQ skills aren't important and the personal development and self-awareness isn't important, but I just feel that that's work you do in a therapy room, not in a boardroom kind of thing. And but I think what's also I wanted to ask you about now is, we talked about with people starting businesses because they necessity, right?
Right.
So clearly with the whole, now granted this is not normal times, but with COVID and so many people being laid off and, do you think that we're going to see more entrepreneurs, or do you think it's more people who are doing like side hustles, like doing shopping, or driving Uber and stuff like that? Side gigs becoming more gig, oriented society. I mean, what's your take on where we're going?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I mean, what we know about side gigs is, we could project, sometime in the future by 2030 that the number of side gigs may in fact double from 50 million to 100 million people with side gigs. What we also know from the research is that all workforce groups, whether they be baby boomers, Gen X, millennials, all are participating in side gigs. So this is not just something that young people are doing. There's probably a third or more of the baby boomers who have side gigs. That is certainly going to influence it. What we also know in crisis is it breeds innovation and opportunity. So, what you also see, and I can't quite remember the study in total, but if you look at the Fortune 500 companies, well over half of them were started during recessions and economic trauma times, right? Our most durable, sustainable companies came out of crisis. My hope would be there'll be higher levels of entrepreneurship in the future because we're now, just as we heard yesterday from Wendy Kennedy in our Ideas at Work event, customer needs have changed. Your needs have changed. My needs have changed. What we will tolerate has changed. And so with that, there are going to be new delivery models, new platforms and channels of how we move product and services and solutions to the mass market. And so in that, we should see higher levels of entrepreneurship.
But also, do you think that it's going to hurt women even more? Because what they have shown is that the crisis of COVID has absolutely killed. Women have now gone back 3 steps in terms of being in the work world, because the reality of it is if the kids can't go to school and the daycare centers are closed, they're the ones staying home, so they're sort of being sidelined. So where do you think that women are going to come out of this?
Yeah, there's no doubt in the short term, that may be the case. What we do know is that women and historically excluded groups of people are starting businesses at higher rates than their counterparts. So what we do know is that Black-owned businesses, Latino-owned businesses are starting at 1.5 to 2 times the rate of their counterparts, their white male counterparts. And so we do know that there's a significant amount of entrepreneurial energy there. What we don't know And what we won't know for some time is we don't have data on what's happening in terms of the startup activities, male, female, and sustainability. But we do know that some of the early analysis of business closures suggests that non-white businesses are being hit at a tremendously higher rate in terms of business closure. So we are going to have to work on that. So at the same time that we're starting businesses, we're also going to have to provide some sustainability and survivability skills and support systems to people who are currently in business.
Well, because you talk about this idea of how businesses now, the near term versus the longer term, and how they're going to, like right now, they need to focus more on liquidity and cash flow. But you look at the margin of like a restaurant, and that margin is so minuscule that they can't think about, liquidity and cash flow. So, I mean, how do we deal with that and look at this idea of survivability?
Well, every business has to, because at the end of the day, one of the three kind of most important metrics for a business, right? Liquidity is right in there. So we're going to have to focus on their business model, right? And how they sustain themselves, because their ability to generate runway to allow them to stay in business will depend on it. So we're going to have to help skill those businesses, right? And you're seeing some where they're reducing the number of restaurants in their footprint, they're reducing the menu, they're trying to explore some level of innovation with, greater takeout, app-related stuff, working with different delivery partners. You're seeing some experimentation going on there. I mean, restaurants have been a low-margin business to start with. That's not going to change, but their ability to weather the storm is going to depend on the diversity of their customer base. It's going to depend on smart, execution of their business model, and it's going to depend on them focusing on the fundamental things that drive profitability for their restaurant.
But with a restaurant, the idea is, yes, it is a low margin, and it does take 5 to 7 years to really become profitable. But once you hit that, it becomes, you make a lot of money. I mean, there are banks that make, double digits of millions of dollars a year. So I think but one of the things that this talked about is this lack of profitability, because it is the number one reason cited by both men and women for discontinuing a business is profitability. So people don't understand, that it has to be profitable. I mean, you can lose, you hear about like Amazon, for instance. I don't remember how many years when Amazon was started that it lost money. I mean, I don't even think Uber now isn't making money yet. And they talk about that, how they know there's going to be this stage where they don't make money and then they'll make money. But most people can't live in that zone. So how is that shifting what people are thinking about in terms of their businesses?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. There are really three fundamental reasons why startups fail, right? First is lack of product market fit. So you have something the market doesn't want, and the market's giving you feedback they don't want it. That's a number one reason, bar none, right? Second is lack of capitalization, mostly undercapitalization. Most startups start and they don't have enough money to operate. If we look at the pre-pandemic, the average company had less than 30 days of funding in liquidity, and post-pandemic, even after the government programs, they didn't improve that at all. And in fact, in places where there are shutdowns and restrictions on percentage of people that can eat in restaurants, that certainly hurts it. And the third is management issues, team issues, leadership issues in the people that own the company. And so we got to continue to help people figure those three things out as to what might most negatively impact their startup. On the existing company side, it's really a reimagination of the business model. Who your customer was and how they consumed your product is different as we work through this stage of the pandemic than it was before the pandemic. Very few will say that nothing changed, right?
Right.
And so for those companies, you can't take your customer for granted. You have to reimagine your business model. You have to pay attention to the things that drive value in that business, and then you're going to have to deploy your resources and allocate them. You know, the most important lesson I think I've learned in the pandemic is leaders keep moving, right? So organizations that didn't just stop, you know, and kept moving, kept innovating, kept redesigning, kept figuring out how they support people and their customers and their employees and their community have fared better than those that didn't.
So that leaves my question, both for your role at the NIC and being involved in lots of it, what makes a good leader? And so in entrepreneurs, in some cases, they're not the best leaders. And that's why a lot of times you'll see them bring in a seasoned CEO or someone to run the business. So what do you think defines a really good leader?
Yeah, the vast majority of entrepreneurs over time outgrow their ability to lead the company they started.
And that really happened with Twitter is a perfect example of that.
Yeah, and even Uber would be another great example of that, right? Over time, the leader often becomes obsolete to the company they founded because the leader still relies on the way they do things, and they've not changed as the business has changed and the conditions have changed. And so, you know, if you want to stay relevant, you know, higher EQ, higher self-awareness, higher ability to see around corners is going to be a key part of that, to be able to make the adjustments that you have to make in order to be successful. I think the key attributes of leadership today, and I think because I'm a big Jim Collins fan, you know, level 5 leaders, right?
So he was also the good to great,
right? Humility plus will, level 5 leaders,
is
right?
Is it humility plus
will?
Okay.
Yeah, and so these are the people who face the brutal realities, right? They didn't sugarcoat it. They're courageous in how they deal with it, with their employees, with their stakeholders, with their community, right? These are courageous leaders, and so that's really what it's going to take. Is you have to face the brutal reality of the facts that are before you, not as you wish them to be, but as they are.
Right. So that's like with Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
They talk about that he lived in this imaginary sort of. He created his own reality. So that, you know, at one point hurt him, but at the same time, it was also that gave him that blinders on drive, which entrepreneurs have to have. Yet you also have to be coachable because. You know, if you're not willing to listen to input or from, you know, either investors or people or what the market tells you. So it's a very hard, you have to be like a flexible, pig-headed, you know, stubborn person. I mean, that's why I think these certain skills of entrepreneurs cannot be taught. I think that that's that spirit. It's sort of that kind of fix to it. But
only 2.5% of the population have the rare and special gift to be what Gallup calls this rare and special entrepreneur. Right? Steve Jobs, if he had taken the assessment, he would have been in the 2.5%.
Right.
The rest have to account for it. So the rest can build. Right? There's a certain amount of skill set that is genetic. So if you had previous generations of parents and grandparents and uncles and aunts that were, you know, small business owners or entrepreneurs, there's a certain amount that comes from your upbringing, right? And maybe adversity or crisis that you faced in your life. And then there's a significant amount that can in fact be learned.
Or right? I think talking about Gallup and the whole idea of playing to your strengths. I mean, one of the things that I believe is that I'm not going to be my own lawyer. I'm not going to be my own accountant. And I don't need to be the smartest person in the room. You shouldn't be the smartest person. But I need to understand accounting and some of the legal issues so that I can interpret what they're telling me or I can ask the important questions. So I think that we have to look at that. We don't need to worry about, you know, in school, we sort of are taught to build our weaknesses. You know, you're not good at math, so you got to spend more time on math. Instead of saying, okay, you're not that great in math, okay, get it so that you can do basic fundamentals, but you're really good at critical thinking or creativity, and so build those up. And that's a lot of what the Gallup strengths are, and we're not good at doing that, even at that fundamental level. And so I think, though, that the, you know, this idea, though, about new ventures and stuff, I mean, Indiana is not too good. I mean, we're 47th in this whole idea, and why do you think that Indiana is just not able to get the entrepreneur and the new venture formation? What is it?
Yeah, there's some, when you look at the Kaufman data that does that ranking, I think, several things kind of, get punctuated in that conversation. I mean, the first is Indiana does a very good job for established companies of helping them survive and sustain. So if you look at the other metrics in the Kaufman index that makes up kind of that startup activity component, we do a very, very good job with existing companies that are trying to stay in business and grow. Why we haven't done a good job on the startup formation rates may be several-fold. The standard argument in Indiana is it's a capital issue, that it's the access to capital, it's the flyover state. We do not have
Wall Street. We can't get
we don't have
here.
Proportionate access.
Right.
But if that were true, there are 4 states that are somewhere over 70% of all the capital in the United States flows to 4 states. So that can only partially explain it. I think a lot of it is culture and talent. Right? When entrepreneurship is not considered a legitimate career option, I think that creates a problem, because if people are thinking we educate people, our school system educates people to go to work for other people, it doesn't educate people to go to work for themselves.
Right.
And then there's a cultural piece, I think, also in Indiana that, there's not as much of an atmosphere of encouragement of starting companies. If you talk to parents of kids, they'll say, we think it's safer if you go work for a large company like Procter & Gamble or Intel or GE than there is in starting your own company. So I think it's more on the talent side. I think it trumps capital, but there's no doubt capital is a component, but the vast majority of companies are not funded with external capital, so can only explain part of our problem.
Right.
The other part of our problem is making sure we have the conditions, the support systems, the regulatory environment, and the culture and community that surrounds and embraces entrepreneurs and encourages them to start companies. And that's what we haven't done as well in Indiana as other states. When you get outside of Texas, California, Massachusetts, and some of the hot spots of capital, we are all trying to promote some of the same things.
Well, do you also think that partly it's that we have the issue of, and look at Fort Wayne, Northeast. I mean, we don't have less than 40% have higher, secondary, college degrees, and even I don't even know, less than I think 10% have secondary degrees, PhDs or masters. We don't have a very good per capita wage rates, so I don't think that we sort of. Because of that, I think that limits, because like we said, that a large majority of the people, the better educated you are, the more, experience that you've had, the more likely you will be successful. And that a lot of people, because of the way that you have to fund most entrepreneurs, which is with friends and family, although I don't agree with that, because then you won't have friends and family. I think that because you can't put money away to sort of build what you would need to buy into a business, I don't think that we sort of, that also hurts us. What do you think?
Yeah, there's, no doubt there's a lot to unpack in the things that you're mentioning. I mean, number one, friends and family is the largest source of funding of ventures. Right? Everybody talks about venture capitalists, they talk about angel investors, they talk about banks, but the number one source of funding, the largest, most dominant source of funding for new ventures is friends and family. We don't have a really good culture in Indiana around that. We're afraid to ask family and friends, we're afraid to share with family and friends, and oftentimes that gets in our way of efficiently raising money to start our venture. The other thing we have to remember remember is the vast majority of ventures are self-financed. They are not financed through angel investors, institutional capital sources, and others. So, depending on which study you look at, let's just say somewhere between 10 and 15% of all ventures receive external third-party funding to get their venture off the ground. And so the vast majority are building something from scratch, which takes longer and also requires more resources from the founder and his or her team.
And I also think that VCs and outside, they're sort of, if it's not a technology-driven company, they're not looking at it, even though it is products and services. So one of the things that you've done, I think, in looking at some of the innovative programming and things that the Nick does, and you're looking at is that you started the Kiva program. So tell me a little bit about how that works.
Yes, one of the things we know is because of the bias that exists in angel investing for women-owned businesses, there is equally a bias in the banking industry relative to financial services for underserved minority business builders and owners. We know that the typical ways that banks determine loans are personal credit score, debt to income, time in business, all sorts of measures which penalize certain populations of people heavier than they do other populations.
Or it penalizes when you are starting a startup because you've given up your job, you have no, you sold everything. Right, yeah.
For sure. And so Kiva Hub is a recognition that to get people on the first rung of the capital ladder of what we call microfinancing allows them to basically access money using non-traditional measures. So Kiva's developed proprietary algorithms to assess somebody as to what their credit worthiness is without using these systemically biased methods of calculating it. And what Kiva has found is a 97% repayment rate. And what Kiva has found is that they can help get these businesses funded through crowdfunding. And so, for instance, one of the first ones we did had 308 lenders who each on average gave $34 to an entrepreneur, but she was fully funded in 3 business days.
Wow.
Right?
I'm looking into this.
Yeah, so this is a first rung on that capital ladder. It's not the last rung, and it's not the only rung.
No, but I also say...
But it's getting you ready for external financing.
How is it different than Kickstarter?
Well, Kickstarter, is another crowdfunding, platform. Right, but Kickstarter does lots of things, right? I could, if I were making these cups, I could offer you a cup,
right? But this is really a loan.
This is a loan, so there's equity-based crowdfunding, there's product-based crowdfunding, and there's a loan-based crowdfunding. Kiva is the largest and best in this. There are only 20-something U.S. hubs. Kiva is much larger in other parts of the world. But in the United States, there are just over 20 hubs, in which Fort Wayne is one of them.
Yeah, well, because it really started, it was the economist who did it in India to start businesses, and he actually won the Nobel Prize in economics for it. And they do find that the high rate of return of people paying them back. So do you think that in that case, this would have never worked because of technology? So do you think in some ways, I think that technology helps an entrepreneur, but I think it also hurts, because with technology, truthfully, anyone can start a business. I mean, you could start a website, you could start, the barriers of entry are lower, but your success rate is also lower. Do you think that technology helps or hurts the ability to start businesses, or is it how it's used?
Well, clearly the evidence says it has helped, right? So the evidence, we can get into the difficulties of how technology dislocates things, but the evidence is clear that because there's a reduced barrier to entry, there's a reduced cost, there's a greater efficiency in the system. Technology is helping help to do that, right? I could collaborate with a colleague in Italy, as if we were sitting across the table like we're doing right now. So the evidence is clear that entrepreneurial startup rates are higher as a result of less barriers to entry, primarily driven by the accessibility of being able to start your startup in your bedroom, in your Starbucks, in your garage, in your car, wherever. The issue as to how it's impacted startup companies, I think, the vast majority of companies are able to communicate better with their stakeholders, customer groups, suppliers, much better able to communicate than you would, and more efficiently communicate than you would if you didn't have technology. But there certainly is dislocation as a result of the technology that pushes certain businesses towards obsolescence versus businesses towards, creating new customers.
Running, Nick, and from your background, and we didn't even get into that, but you have to be an entrepreneur. So I want to know, how can you, like, when you see somebody with a really good idea, or okay, this has got potential, how are you able to, when you see opportunity, how are you able not to want to jump in, personally? I mean, how do you separate that out?
Well, running a nonprofit support organization, there's a thing called annulment. So, we have very clear conflict of interest policies that guide that decision making. So, I personally, and nobody that coaches entrepreneurs takes an equity investment personally in any company that we serve or support. The Innovation Center has at times made equity and or debt investments in companies and does take an interest, and I often serve in a board capacity or in the investor capacity with that company, but we have to really separate the work that we do with the companies from the fact that we cannot have personal annulment as a result of it.
Well, you're going to have to come back, because I want to have a whole conversation about innovation, and I feel that's one of the buzzwords, and design thinking, and so you'll have to come back, because I didn't even get to touch my surface with you. But at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Victorien Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. What is your favorite word?
Passion.
What is your least favorite word?
Excuse.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
When others are moving in the direction of their dreams.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
When people travel with a dark cloud.
What sound or noise do you love?
Champagne popping.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Complaints.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I always wanted to be a doctor in retrospect.
I was the daughter of a doctor. Doctors think they are business owners. They're not.
For sure.
Yeah. What profession would you not like to do?
Manufacturing line worker.
Well, that's going to become pretty much obsolete because of artificial intelligence.
Automation's going to take care of that.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Raising 3 strong boys.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Ronald Reagan.
How would you like to die?
In my sleep.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Certainly, well done, good and faithful servant.
Well, we've agreed that you will come back so that we can talk about some other nuances, and especially innovation and what you're doing in that area. So,
yeah, because innovation and entrepreneurship are different.
Are very different, yes.
Yeah,
and then also to talk about really some of the specific programs I think that the Nick and WEOC are doing that are proprietary. So I hope you will come back.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I hope you will join me next time when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.